All right. Well, we interrupt our normal programming this week to talk about something special. So, in this episode of Qualified at the Intersection, we're going to detour a little bit from talking about the ways in which Black women are the canaries in the coal mine to talk a bit about hidden figures. So I love talking to people about my book and about my work because sometimes it raises up new ideas, things I hadn't even thought about. And this happened the other day when I was presenting to a group, and one of the people in the question time said, well, I wonder if we should focus so much on being the first. I mean, maybe thinking so much about being the first gets in our way. And then she said something I thought was very interesting. And she said, and how do we even know we're the first? I mean, she said, what about that movie Hidden Figures and how people hide the fact that women and people of color were in positions of authority and power before? Maybe we're not the first. Maybe we shouldn't lean into that. So I thought that was such an interesting point because, on the one hand, at that moment, if you're the first person, like Dr. Dory Tunstall, the first ever to run a school of design, I mean, at that moment, you are that in that space. But what if historically things have been hidden from us in a way that prevents us from knowing that we've always been part of the story, and this exclusion is the diversion, you know? So that got me thinking about the popes. And it turns out, yeah, there's hidden figures there too. So apparently, many of you may know this, many of you may not, but there were three Black popes in antiquity. So the three Black popes, and of course I have to look this up because I certainly cannot remember all these folks' names. The first was Pope Victor the First. The second was Pope Miltiades. I think that's it, Miltiades. And then Pope Gelasius. So what's interesting about Pope Victor is actually the reason we celebrate Easter Sunday on a Sunday. So each of these popes had a significant impact. I believe one of them suggested translation of the Bible. Yeah, one of them, it may have been Victor, who had the Bible said in Latin. So the interesting part is these three popes who were from the African continent, and then some sources say, well, maybe, but even the Catholic Church says no, there's three Black popes from Africa. And part of the reason we have a problem with accepting this is we're putting our modern interpretation up on antiquity. So, one of the things to know about antiquity is that in Greek and Roman society, it wasn't designed the way we think it was. It wasn't the movie Gladiator. It wasn't, especially Rome, these were multicultural societies. And that is not something we even think about because that's not how it's portrayed. And one reason we don't know that is because of how statues from those times are displayed. So that goes toward hiding the history. There is a scholar named Sarah Bond. She wrote an article about 8 years ago now, and she's written about this. She wrote about this previously, but she specializes in Roman history. And she was saying that we need to start seeing the classical world in color. And in writing that article, that woman got death threats. She got death threats. She was at the University of Iowa, I believe. They had to try to get security for her. And they said she was making up history when in fact she's correcting history. That's how we get lost in the shuffle. And she says, Greeks and Romans did not classify people as white. In fact, whiteness as a concept is a relatively new concept in the history of the world. We're talking 400 some years ago, coinciding directly with the slave trade. That's not to say that Europeans didn't have a sense of European superiority, but it is to say that we impose concepts of white and black into antiquity where they, in fact, didn't exist. And this is one thing Sarah Bond talks about. She says many of the classical marble sculptures and things from that time were originally painted. Frequently, they were painted gold, red, green, black, and brown. And as the pigments deteriorated over time, art historians, like a historian named Johann Joachim Winkelmann, an 18th century scholar, um, he perpetuated the idea that these white marble statues represented an ideal form of beauty. And by doing that, he created kind of a white supremacist notion of Rome and Greek, which isn't true. And they wouldn't have recognized that. She says we have to see the ancient world in color because when you look at the ancient world, there were people of all types of colors. They, conquered lands. And while they did have slavery, slavery wasn't based on the concept of race. And she says that the paintings and the sculptures likely represented a variety of skin tones in those societies. So, if the truth would be told, we would see those statues with the proper coloring and we would know that we were there. We've always been there, a part of these stories. It says Greek and Roman empires had multiracial citizenry. And because there isn't diversity in the film, there wasn't strong and still isn't really strong diversity in the field of art history and looking at and trying to see what you're seeing, the story we've been told is a totally different story. And that is why we don't contextualize the fact that the three Black popes were Roman because they were part of a Roman society that didn't, I'm not going to say they didn't see race, they just didn't have the concepts that we had. And once you became Roman, you became Roman. And some of these statues we see in museums today should not be pure white marble. That's not how they were made. And actually, when you look at the hair of some of the statues, you think, that hair sure looks like textured hair or woolly hair or different hair, but you don't see yourself in that story. So just that one comment during that conversation got me thinking about the hidden figures, the fact that maybe we aren't the first in our fields. Now, that doesn't change the fact that in today's world, past antiquity, past hidden information, that we're the only person actually walking down that hall, having that experience, enduring that hostility. But it would have mattered, and it would matter to know if, in fact, we aren't. And then we ask the question, what happened? What diverted what should be a natural continuation of our inclusion? That is intentional systemic effort to stop our inclusion. So the three hidden popes really matter because the three Black popes indicate we have been there. And as the papal conclave gets underway and people say, oh my gosh, could they have a Black pope? Baby, you had a Black pope. You have Easter because of Black pope. You had the Bible in Latin because of a Black pope. But our role is hidden and obscured. And so people say, well, is it proven? Everything about us has to have triple proof where people literally can make up things. I don't know if you know something about some of the Egyptologists and some of the things they made up and maybe bought in local trinket shops and said they found it in the burial areas. I mean, it's bananas, okay? But when it comes to our presence in history, it's a bit of a question mark. And it comes back to the three women who were the hidden figures in NASA. And so it is important for us at this moment with the papal conclave to remember, and whether you think the Catholic Church is a good institution or a negative institution, or whether you believe in Christianity or not, isn't exactly the point. The point is that we have been a part of these stories all along. And if there is a Black pope, he won't be the first pope. First Black pope, rather. He will be one of the Black popes in the history of having popes. And what happened in between that stopped that and diverted that has a lot to do with the clash of colonialization and the spread of white supremacy in a very specific way around the world. So we actually can trace the change. And so when people say, oh, we just forget race, it doesn't matter. It mattered when we made it a thing that mattered, and everything got degenerated from that point. So yeah, I just think the idea of the three Black popes as hidden figures and the fact that maybe we aren't the first is so interesting. And I really appreciate the person in the session for raising that point with me and causing me to think more deeply about it. So you will see what the smoke reveals of the next pope. But and tomorrow we will go back to looking at the ways in which Black women are canaries in the coal mine, looking at two other women who you'll find their stories very interesting. So thanks for tuning in.